David, would you like to give us a sample of John Davis at war?
Okay. This story it's based on a alternative First World War event, and John has met Captain Ioun, who may or may not be all he seems to be. Believe what he was hearing. How could the captain have any kind of dealing with these men? If the No Men were caught, they'd be court-martialed and shot for desertion. John couldn't believe the army would have any kind of dealings with them. It's just not right, John said. Why were these men hiding out underground when they should be back fighting with their units? It's not as simple as that, said the captain. We can't get supplies any other way. If you want, I can go alone. John considered for a while and then said, No, I'll come. You'll need my help to carry the supplies back. They waited until the next evening before venturing out. The captain led the way over shell craters, round thick mud, through barbed wire fences and past the charred and broken remains of trees and houses. They kept silent as they marched southwards, parallel to the two lines. Each bit of blasted and wasted earth looked exactly like any other. If he had not been with the captain, John would have been lost, and most likely wandered off into one of the trenches. How do you know where we're going? Asked John. The captain showed John a metal box with a glass panel. There seemed to be some odd shapes that might be a map. Look, he said. That's where we are, and this is where we're going. This is the tank. That arrow shows you which way to go. I'm showing you this in case you need to go back alone. They walked on until a buzzing sound came from the box. Here we are, said Captain Ioun. John looked around, but it didn't look any different to any of the other stretches of mud they had walked through. It was still dark, but it was getting near to morning. Soon the snipers would be back out. Shouldn't we get back under cover? John asked. Just wait, said Captain Ioun. While John waited, he noted several openings in the ground, like rat holes. Step forward, called a voice. Captain Ioun took a couple of strides forward, and John followed after him. John noticed that there were faces in each of the rat holes, staring at him, and then that he noticed from each hole the barrel of a rifle protruded. They were surrounded, and if the soldiers, the No Men, in the holes opened fire, they would be cut down instantly. What do you want? Asked the voice. And that's me finished.
Thank you, David. That was great.
And a good story too. I'm getting my PhD in history and focusing on World War I, so I'm always a sucker for that sort of thing.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I love the atmosphere that you gave in that story. It really drew you in, and really, in very few words, gave you the feeling of the futility of war. And it was just beautifully written. So,
and it's about that the journey that John goes through from supporting the imperial dream to questioning those things and what they really mean and what value they have.
Well, thank you again for sharing it in the anthology and for that wonderful reading. JD, would you like to give us a taste of The Rapture of Batoon Hayes now?
Sure. Yeah, it's an odd story to try and find a piece to read because it builds and, goes in directions. It is ostensibly set in the Great Lakes Basin, which I'm representing here, in some form, in some future. So what I'm going to do is, this is from the beginning, but it doesn't start at the very beginning. And what you've got is a peddler wandering around, gathering things to sell. And he's got a Zo as a pack beast. and he's acquired a sidekick in the form of an ape-like creature named Sona. And none of this seems to quite all fit together. And he's now selling things to the scholars because he was at the falls, and there was a bit of a fighting between the different religious groups. So he says of her, I didn't know if Sona was her proper name or just her attempt to say howdy, but she came to understand, as I reckoned at the time, that it meant her. In time, I'd come to realize she understands a good deal more. No one on Scholar's Hill had seen her like either. Closest we had was Scholar Lung's missing link, and a dozen names in the tongues of the learned ancients, things in books left behind when the old scholars up and vanished. Saw illustrations that looked a little like her, though, but I also found myself thinking of Leon's little Bobby. In times that were, one encountered, here and there, a thing that just was. Sona, I reckoned, just was. Sorry, a bit of a sound issue there. The first time I went to the Great Falls as a really young fella, I was with Leanne and Bobby. We flew with the gulls and green birds over the rivers that connected the upper and lower sea, and dove with those birds into the cooling mist that rose from the falls. It was like swimming in the sky, and the views made your head sing in a way I recalled years later when I had strong brew, and no pain later with flying. Didn't know half the time which way was up or down. People hear this now like they do any old-timer's tale of wonders, as something as might be entertained, but not too seriously. Those times had passed, and quite a few people doubted now they ever were. But it's true, I tell you. In special places at magic times, people would go a-flying. The new devout was another matter, though. They crave such stories, and as far as I can tell, enjoy adding to them. They believe a new age of wonders awaits. I reckon they might be awaiting a long time. I used to be good with the new devout. Funny fellas, but fine customers. And sometimes they're looking for things I can't sell to anyone else. People want things, and they don't just appear in the stores like they used to. So I gather up trade what's left. When I was a young fellow, why, everyone just had things. You wanted food, you went and got it, from cafes and tea houses of all sorts, taverns for the adults, and those bing bars as were popular with the youth. I ain't denying the age of wonders and miracles, because I can still recollect it. A time there was when people had been beyond the reach of evil, at least mostly. And when we walked with the blessed folk, the special folk, and from time to time flew with them too. No one called them gods then, though. We didn't even call the creator parents that. Listen to me if you want the truth. I know. I knew Mother Goose and Santa Claus too. I'm just going to stop there. There's a lot more, but...
Thank you, JD. I love your voice for it too. Very fitting.
Yes.
So
It's
Erynn,
yeah, that goes in a lot of different directions. So yeah.
Erynn, would you like to give us a little bit of Other London Ella's birthday?
All right. So I when I wrote this, it was actually long before I was even trying to write a book. I was just writing short stories featuring the characters that eventually became the characters for the book. But when I wrote it, it's broken. Like, a couple of people here have cited that it was a little bit tricky to find things to read, because of the way their story was written. And that was, that's true here too, not because it's anything super deep or super interesting, but because I had the smart idea to write this short story so that it was broken up with constantly flipping perspectives between three characters. So the story here is that in a London, Ontario, in which magic and interdimensional travel have been normal since the 70s, in a magic shop run by a surly old wizard, the familiar of the wizard, a fairy cat named Nebula, decides that she wants to help with the quest to get a birthday present for the part-timer at their shop, Ella. I'm sorry, I had a hard time explaining that and flipping through the pages at the same time. Anyways, I highly recommend reading the story because Denji, Zack, and Nebula, the three magically inclined people trying to get Ella, a normal Earth girl, a birthday present, they get up to some shenanigans. Meanwhile, Nebula was ahead of both of them. Of course she was. She was a fae, and that made her almost like a god compared to them. There's no reason a human wizard or a mere child should be able to outdo her at anything, including gift-giving. Not that gift-giving is something a chaotic being such as Nebula would normally be doing, but there's a first time for everything. Nebula had learned during her time as a cat that being little and unassuming wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Being big and intimidating was helpful in many circumstances, but other times it helped to be able to fit into small spaces and travel through crowds without being noticed. While she normally cursed having her default form as a cat in a world so much bigger than her, today was not one of those days. Tail raised high, Nebula quickly weaved in and out of the crowds at Masonville Mall, as if she was a fighter plane dodging bullets from all sides. While any old cat would normally be kicked out of a high-class mall like this, there were legal rules in place that animals who were magical enough to speak, and do so coherently, were to be treated with the same respect as any human customer. Nebula wasn't here to shop, though. She was here to observe and to interview. Having come to the mall so frequently during her explorations of the city, Nebula knew when teenagers didn't want to go to school, they would go somewhere like this to hang out instead. She admired the rebellious spirit of those who defied society's expectations of them to sit calmly and learn in favor of cheap thrills and fast food. Such tenacity, such anarchy. She knew these young people would be kindred spirits to a chaotic being like her, even if they were still simple humans at heart. Sure enough, standing huddled in a group not far from the mall smoothie shop was a group of 5 girls not much older than Ella, who had haphazardly tried to hide their school uniforms with their winter coats. They were laughing and talking to each other, some of them sipping smoothies. Giving a satisfied smile, Nebula walked right up to them and cleared her throat. "Excuse me," she said, taking care to try and look as much like a normal, friendly, and adorable talking cat as possible. The girls stopped talking and looked down at her, and Nebula waved with her scarf, an object she was entirely capable of moving around as if it were arms. "Oh, what a cute kitty!" one of the girls, an auburn-haired girl with rectangular glasses, exclaimed. "Weird scarf. Are you lost?" Another girl with dirty blonde hair tied in a ponytail asked. Curiously, she was the only one wearing pants instead of a skirt. "Oh no, I'm not lost," Nebula said. "Actually, I would like to ask a favor of you girls." "I'll help if I can pet you," the auburn-haired girl said. "Why would you agree to that without knowing what it is? Maybe it's dangerous," a girl with long, straight blonde hair said. "Oh, come on, that's racist and you know it," a short girl with frizzy brunette hair said. "I want to pet the kitty too," a soft-voiced girl with light brown hair said. "You can all pet me," Nebula said happily, getting ready to be smothered in pats and scritches behind the ears. "And it's nothing dangerous. I have a human friend whose birthday is coming up. She's turning 15 and I have no idea what to get her as a present, though. And she's the only teenage girl I know. I was wondering if you could show me some places and things you like." "Oh, that's simple enough, I guess," the blonde girl said. The auburn-haired girl put out a hand to Nebula. "Sure, we can help you," she said with a smile. "I'm Bianca. The cautious one is Brina. Little Miss I Won't Wear the Skirt uniform is Ava, and the small person with the frizzy hair is Angel. Oh, and the girl you can barely hear is Cosmo." "Did you have to introduce us all?" Ava said with a sigh. "Yes," Bianca exclaimed. "I'm the leader, don't you know?" "She kind of is," Brina said with a laugh. Nebula smiled and put the end of her scarf in Bianca's hand and shook it. "Thank you all," she said excitedly. "Now where do we start?" The girls exchanged a look and smiled. Well, if your friend is anything like us, Angel said with a grin. Hot topic! Cosmo cheerfully exclaimed.
Thank you, Erynn. I love how lively and how varied the characters are there, and Nebula's just a delight.
The story slightly, I don't want to say dippy, but there's a voice to Nebula that I think a lot of cats would sound like.
Yes.
Yeah.
Though it
Do you think
does
that's
bother me a
appropriation
bit
of
if you
voice?
see the chatter. If animals who speak coherently have rights, does that mean in your world people who cannot speak coherently do not? Because that would effectively disenfranchise Twitter.
And about time, too.
Yes, agreed.
Frankly, all things considered, I think my cats are smarter than about 50% of the human population. So
And
I
like
think the
80%
actual
Twitter.
Nebula. I think the actual Nebula is smarter than most of Twitter. She knows how to use my computer and can. My computer has a touch screen, and she frequently will walk up to it and bat at it, and somehow always navigate to the tabs where she can turn on music or send messages to this one friend of mine who happens to be allergic to cats.
Of course, that's what cats do. They always know the person who is allergic to cats or doesn't like cats.
It's true.
And JD, I just want to pass on a couple of comments from the chat here after your reading. Anonymous Typewriter said, "You better voice that audiobook." And then Islanders Caper said, "Agreed." And you know what? I think that's a good idea. I think it would be fantastic. I guess Hugh might have to get an actress to do his
Yeah, I
story.
think so.
But if we made an audiobook of each of you reading your own stories, I think that would be really fascinating.
Well, thank you. If I was standing up, I think I'd do the voice better because it's gravelier. It's loosely based on Gabby Hayes, who is now almost completely forgotten, but he was an actor who solidified the Old West grizzled stereotype character. And Batoon Hayes is named for Gabby Hayes. And I don't know what he's doing in that story, other than that story was based on one that I wrote back in the 90s. It did not work at all, and was frankly, it was a 90s story. It was one of those stories that said, "See how edgy this is?" And I never tried to get it published because it was terrible. But the idea was good. And then years later, I just had the image of the Batoon Hayes character and Sona and the Zoe. And I thought, maybe that's an inroad into that story that will make it work, instead of just throwing all the harsh stuff. Because there is some harsh stuff that comes up in that story. Right up front, in that I'm a young writer and I'm going to be nasty, which is just stupid. Forced edge is as immature as forced sort of fairy dust happiness, right? It's just a different kind of immaturity. You're not being, you're not being mature when you're being edgy instead of being, super nice. You've just gone from taking, a sheltered 9-year-old perspective to like a cranky 14-year-old perspective. And neither of those people are immature, and there may be a perspective for that in some writing, but it wasn't this story. This story had to be handled a certain way. But thank you for that.
There was a line in a panel that I was in a number of years ago that always stuck with me, that the mirror image of a cliche is still a cliche.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much so.
I'm always telling my friends that one. I'm always telling them directly inverting the trope makes it the same as the trope.
Yep. Precisely. All right.
Yeah, I mean, if the trope is super prevalent, you could argue that inverting it is at least a way of calling attention to it. But that you can only go so far with that. I
Yeah.
agree. at a certain point, that just becomes, see, I'm being different. Are you being good?
Exactly.
Do I want to read this story? You know?
All right.
Well, at a certain point, you're just contrarian.
Yes.
No, you're not. Yeah, sorry.
Exactly.
It's if you know the argument sketch from the Monty Pythons.
Mhm.
Yes.
It's been a while since I've seen Monty Python.
No, it hasn't.
Another Monty Pythonism that I like has arisen of late is the increase of areas belonging to the Ministry of Silly Walks. If anyone has seen those videos online.
Oh. Is this a thing that exists? I need to look this up later.
Oh yes, absolutely. It started with a family in England somewhere, I believe, who just put a sign out on their front lawn and said, "You are now entering a Ministry of Silly Walks zone." And they had a camera set up in front of the house pointing at that area and just recorded people doing their silly walks along that area. And it's taken off. I know of a few other people who have done the same thing.